Hey everybody, how's it going? Great to see you guys here. Great to be here. Last year, MacBrain had we had like a get together in this space, and then the first JNUC was in this space. So lots of awesome history. That and Dayblock's pretty awesome downstairs if you haven't had a chance to check out their pizzas. So, introduction to extension attributes. So you know off the bat this is going to be a very low-level beginner from the beginning presentation. So we're going to go over all the basics of what extension attributes are, what types there are, how you can use them, how you can create them, and also where you can find some online, so that if you haven't started creating extension attributes, you have somewhere to go. As I said, my name is Andrew Sego. I'm part of MacBrain, which is a Mac admin community. We have meetups and kind of like mini conferences, so to speak. So I think here in Minneapolis, there's a Mac admin group that does stuff similar, get a couple of presenters, have a couple topics, and all kind of meet in this similar community-like fashion. My day job, however, is working for a Fortune 100 biotech company. So we support 15,000 Macs worldwide, which there's a lot of other companies these days that have a lot more Macs than we do. But yeah, the whole worldwide thing always makes it a little bit more complex. So with the agenda, just very straightforward. We're going to go into what they are, what extension attributes are, how we use them, all of that. So when I started looking and trying to figure out for this, even just in Google, when I did a Google search for extension attributes, there was just about nothing that came up. If you see this shot right here, that is technically a picture of the JSS. However, it still wasn't even about extension attributes. It was about smart groups. So there is good information for this posted online, obviously the manuals, but yeah, it's a very vague, what is this thing? And really what it boils down to, and at the very root level, all an extension attribute is just kind of a wild card to be able to add a piece of information custom to whatever your needs and wants are into the database in the JSS to be able to report on it or scope something to it, take action. But it is, at least in my opinion, one of the most powerful features of the JSS, and something that does set it apart from other management platforms. So with extension attributes, there's three types of them. Okay, so there's the computer extension attributes, there's mobile extension attributes, and then there's user management extension attributes. Each one of them are similar, but each one is different. So we'll go straight into, since I did not do demos, I did videos for you all. So that we did not have to pray to the demo gods, because undoubtedly something would break and burn, and nobody wants that. So if you haven't gone to grab extension attribute before and know where, there's just briefly navigation on how to get to where extension attributes are for computers. You can either go through the computer menu, down to management, settings, and then extension attributes, or you can go to the settings button in the upper right-hand corner, and then go down to extension attributes. And once you've created one, this is what you're greeted with. It's basically it's a bunch of fields and drop downs and different configuration sets of what you can do. But when we go to the next one, which is the mobile device extension attributes, and this is the path of how to get there. There we go. Yes, sweet. Very similar to computers, but instead of clicking on computers, you click on mobile. You're going to see the same concept when we go to the user extension attributes. But if you look at the mobile device extension attributes, you're starting to have a little bit less, starting to have less options of what you can do with these. And you'll see that even once you get down to user management extension attributes, those have even less fields for you to configure. But they all have their own purposes. And in the user extension attributes, you see there, data type, an input type, and a description. That's really all that you have as far as things that you can configure on there. So if we have all these, aside from the fact that they look different, basically, we're going to get into what makes them different and what are the different parts and what do those fields actually mean. What can you do with those? So on the user extension attributes, you only have two options. You have the data type and you have an input type. And within the data types, you have three options there as well. So this data type is, you're defining what is what is the data, what is the text, what type of text are you going to be showing? Because you can come back and say it's always going to be a number, and that's useful in different reporting scenarios if you're going to do a less than, more than kind of concept, or if it's just a straight text string that you want it to come back with, or if it's a date. If you tell it that it's a date, then you can do different searches, like more than 30 days, less than 30 days. So it does give you some flexibility there. With the user extension attributes, you only have two ways to input that data, and that's either a text field or a pop-up menu. And the text field, we'll get into the actual creation of these after we go through each one of the extension attributes, but the text field is just something you manually type in for each individual record, or you populate it through the API if you want to get a little bit more fancy. And then the pop-down menu, you've predefined some options, and still someone manually takes those actions to define these. When we get over to mobile device extension attributes, we start getting a little bit more information we can choose on here. So we still have data type. Then there's the inventory display, and that's where in the mobile device record this information is going to show up. And then there's still the input types. So the data types we have here, same as before. We have the string, we have the integer, the number, and we have a date. But when we start getting real different here is now we have the option of inventory display. So now we can choose where do we want to present this data in the JSS UI. Like where is it easier to access this, and how does it make sense? And in our input types, we start having new things. So we see here now we also have an LDAP attribute mapping. To be clear, this is another one of those settings that does not appear unless something is turned on. So there's a lot of that in the JSS in its current UI format, that if you went looking for this and you don't have an LDAP server configured, it will not exist. It's only after you configure an LDAP server, whether it's Active Directory, LDAP, however your directory services are working, if you have that defined in the JSS, then this option will be there. Otherwise, you won't see it. And it's also the only automated way for the mobile device extension attributes to populate this information. The most robust out of the three that we'll see with all this is really the computer extension attributes. Those are where you can really get into some awesome nitty-gritty stuff. You see with the data types, it's a lot of redundancy here. Inventory display, we get a little bit more of an option for where we want to display this information. But the real power here is when you have that script option. So we have the LDAP attribute mapping here for the input type. But now we also have the ability to run a script on the local device and come back with information and populate this every time the system runs inventory. There's another option that we have to display where we want to expose this information. If we want to expose it in the Recon app itself, the thick Recon app. Some companies use their on-demand provisioning that way. Depends on how many devices you have, whether or not that's a model that works well for you. Some people use it for asset management, right? So they scan the asset tag or something with a barcode and put it into Recon at that time. And that allows you to have the technicians that are populating or enrolling the systems using Recon or configuring and imaging them, it allows them to input some information into the JSS without actually having to teach them how to use the UI, track down the computer record, any of that. So there is some flexibility this adds in. So next concept is really, all right, so we talked about everything that they are, which I admit is kind of dry and drab because we're just mumbling about things that look the same. But now we're actually going to get into, now how do we create them? How do we actually move forward and use these things? So here we go. So the blank computer extension attribute, same way as we went into the extension attributes before, right? And then we just go ahead there and we click the new button. And that's going to get us right into here in this blank canvas where we had already described the different parts of it. Now, that can be a little bit intimidating because maybe you don't know what you want to do. Maybe you do know what you want to do, but you're not quite sure how to. So it's really awesome and definitely super powerful for us is there's already templates in the JSS for the computer extension attributes. So you can click on templates instead of the new button, and you can sort through these menus and see if there's something that matches what you're trying to do. These are either created by Jamf or they've been submitted by the Jamf Nation community. So you can see there, we decided that we were going to use a template, we clicked it, and our script field's already pre-populated. So we already have that information. No one needed to know how to script, we didn't need to know what a shebang was, none of that. All we needed to know was that we wanted to see whether or not Bluetooth was turned on or not. Along the same lines as that, there's the ability to upload an extension attribute. Yes, okay. It wasn't showing me that it was actually playing on this one. So you can go out to Jamf Nation, and there's, which is, if you're not aware of Jamf Nation, absolutely sign up. Amazing community site, lots of content, a lot of great discussions. You can ask questions, you can get answers from your peers, and sometimes from Jamf as well. But what they have up there is they do have a repository of extension attributes that Jamf has already vetted, and they've gone through it, so you're not going to nuke your computer, and you can choose these and download them and actually be able to upload them directly in. Kind of very similar to how we did the template. However, these are, I would say, more up to date because you can actually see how old they were. There's comments in there. People have the ability to rate them. You can see in the same concept, now it's all pre-populated. Now, in the same kind of scenario, you can also, if you've already created an extension attribute, maybe you're dealing with multiple JSSs, you can download that extension attribute. There's a button after it's already pre-populated and saved that's download, and you can save that, and that's how these get uploaded into Jamf Nation. But you can also then make them portable and move them over to another JSS if you wanted to. So when we're dealing with the extension attributes, the computer extension attribute, here's the view of what all those fields look when they're popped down. And we kind of went over what they were, but I wanted to make sure there was a good look and feel of what you can expect once you get into there. So we talked a little bit about the Recon possibility with the Recon app where you could have a pop-down menu. And so I mocked up a stage for that of like maybe something that would be worthwhile that you would have a technician do, or maybe even if it's not a technician, maybe it's the users themselves have this option to populate this information. And so in this one, did the concept of a kiosk, is the system a kiosk system? Is it a loaner system, or is it a personal system? So as you can see up here, we did input type as pop-up menu. Everything else doesn't necessarily matter. Recon display to computer. So in the Recon app, it's going to show up underneath the computer section. And then we added in just the 3 options that we wanted to have. The pop-up menu is really good for removing human error in typos, uppercase, lowercase, syntax, weird things. Someone calls it a shared system, other people call it a loaner. It helps eliminate human error. So once we've gone through all that, when the tech is actually in the Recon app, you can see that now, right here, they have the concept of system type added. So they have to, once again, all they had to have was access to be able to enroll a system from Recon, and now they can change this one bit of information. Like I said, you can make it whatever you wanted, whether or not it's an asset tag, the serial number is already up in there, but if there's something discernible that you want to be able to add, that's how you would be able to do that, while having human hands still do it every time that a system's being enrolled. And here's an example of if we went and we did a pop down there as a script. This is very simple, what you would end up seeing. But the same concept of maybe you had on your systems already a plist that said what kind of system type it was. This extension attribute, instead of doing a pop-up menu, would just do a defaults read from the plist and come back with a piece of information and then automatically populate that, and which then would make it scopable or reportable within the JSS. And then if you see over here, this is the text input type. So it actually just has a little text box. So the technician, if they wanted to, if you're going to expose it through a Recon, the technician could then, in this scenario, just type in loaner, loaner, kiosk, personal system, however they wanted to do it. But once again, you can see on there, this tech fell asleep on the keyboard, and so this loaner is way different than the other loaner. Not super exciting stuff, but once you start trying to deal with data sets and munging out how many, in this scenario, your VP is like, I want to know how many loaner systems do we actually have? Well, we have 25 loaners and we have one loaner, right? Not going to help. Like, your numbers are going to be all messed up, your reporting is going to be messed up, and you could have just done it with a pop-down menu. A lot of what we do in our organization is try to eliminate human error as much as possible, because you never know if the techs, if they didn't get their cup of coffee, if they're paying attention, if they didn't read the 13th email of the week saying that we changed the naming scheme. So being able to leverage that with those pop-down menus is very useful. And over here, you can see an example of what the LDAP attribute is. So to break it down, the LDAP attribute is checking Active Directory or your LDAP server or your directory services for a specific named attribute in that user's directory record. So in Active Directory, you automatically have the concept of like name, and maybe your Windows AD group already has language in there, or site, or language that they speak, or phone number, or anything that is in Active Directory at that point as defined for that user's profile, you can automatically bring back in to the system at the time of recon. So with this, it's pretty powerful to be able to do that. Not all of the management platforms can do that. And we use this one a lot, or the concept of this one. So we get into now the mobile device extension attributes, which we see now we have a much smaller amount of things. I mean, we still have the ability to do the LDAP mapping, but we don't have the ability to do scripts now, because this is done at the time of inventory, and recon, you don't run scripts against iOS devices. So it can't just get you any piece of information that you possibly want. And then the same concept here, once we get down into the user management extension attributes, we're really limited here on what we can actually put in there. So we've been talking about like what to do, but we've given some kind of concepts of like what you would want to do with them. But I wanted to mock up some real world examples of why extension attributes are so powerful. Like what is so powerful about these, and why is this the way that I think everybody should be using their JSS? So the concept of how can you use them, we're going to go over the 3 different major ways that they can be used that are beneficial. So 1, you can report on anything that you have that you can run a command for on the system, and it comes back with information from the terminal. You can report on that information. No matter what it is, you can capture that, and you can customize what inventory data you're going to have. Whether it is a specific version of Flash, which patch management does a good job of kind of getting that information now, but patch management also in its current form is using extension attributes to get that information. So even there, when we're dealing with something outside of the norm, we're using that. Then a policy scoped to a smart group, and the concept for there, you have a policy, it's scoped to a smart group. That smart group is only going to install Chrome 54 on loaner systems, but we don't ever want to put it on private systems because, we just decided not to because we're mean. So you can scope, and you have that power then. Or you want to scope something to by language off of the LDAP extension attribute that we used as an example there, so that maybe we only wanted to deploy this specific software in English, or maybe we just wanted to deploy it out to systems where the users were showed that they spoke Spanish. Maybe we're then geographical. Maybe we only want to deploy this to the state of Wisconsin. We don't want to deploy it to Texas because Texas hates Chrome, I don't know. But you have the flexibility to do whatever it is that you want. And then with the MDM Profile Variables, what you can do with that is you can actually pre-populate information into your mobile configs without having to do it onesie twosie for every single system. We'll see an example here about defining an email server just out of LDAP attributes and having something generic that you could deploy out to every single computer or every single iOS device and have it be pre-populated with the information that you got from Active Directory. All right. So in this scenario, we ran a command. It's just a simple defaults read. We go through. We get the individual information of exactly the piece of bit out of that defaults read plist that we wanted to have. We created our new extension attribute, and we'll make a quick little script here to make it happen. And instead of just copy and pasting the whole thing, well, I will copy and paste out of terminal, but I just want to give you the concept that it's not really time consuming to start messing around with these extension attributes. You can get a simple one out in a few minutes if you wanted to. And if for whatever reason, starting to dive in directly that way is intimidating. You can always go out and look at what other people have done and maybe reverse engineer it. Maybe there's a defaults read, and in that scenario, I was looking at something in the login window plist. Maybe you wanted to get something else out of the login window plist. All you would have to change is that one little bit of information that said what it was that you were looking for, and now you were able to repurpose someone else's extension attribute to find what you were looking for without having to do a lot of work. So now we have the concept of a policy scoped to a smart group based off of an extension attribute. In this scenario, I'm uploading an extension attribute template. Everything then is pre-populated. This one's giving the iCloud status, so it's reading out every single bit of iCloud and whether or not the user has it turned on or not. So if they have iCloud Drive, document syncing, desktop, whether or not they had mail configured, back to Mac, which sometimes is a problem. But now all that information's up in Casper. So now I'm going through, I'm making a smart group. I'm telling it to show me all the inventory data. I find the iCloud status extension attribute that we just created. Go in there, telling it that I want to have something specific. And now we have a smart group. So now in this smart group, we'll have everyone that has iCloud enabled in this smart group. And then what we can do is then we can push out a policy to them. So in here, we're being badmins, and we're going to harass them because how dare they have iCloud. So that no matter what, we're going to harass them. We're going to set up a dialog box. And then after this, what we're going to end up doing is then we're going to end up scoping this to that smart group. Smart groups update at the time of recon for the system. So if you're leveraging information, it's not going, that smart group isn't going to be updated with that computer's change until it's run inventory or recon. And that's based on how frequent your recon intervals are for your instance. That's configurable within the computer management settings. But to be fair, running inventory, running recon, you want to make sure that you're doing it the least amount of times as possible, because that's a big performance hit. If you have a lot of systems all checking in at one time, because that's when the system's running all these scripts, running all the built-in already Jamf queries to get the bits of system information, and then it's uploading the whole thing. All right. So in here, I didn't do a movie because we had enough movies for one presentation. Because I've actually never done a movie in any of my presentations, but I also wasn't going to be able to do a demo. And I wanted to give you guys the real look and feel of how this is to kind of show that it's not intimidating. You can dive in, you can start working with it. Here we have a mobile extension attribute. And in here, all we've done is we're looking up the LDAP value for the mail host. And then here we can see all of the different wildcards that you can use in MDM profiles. So what these are variables that are predefined. So there's things in there like $username, the list goes on and on. It doesn't appear to be all that clear up there, but you can see this in the manual, the Casper admin manual, and also on Jamf Nation if you do a quick Google on that. Plus these slides will be posted, and you'll be able to yank it out of there. But this was a quick little blurb that I saw about all the different variables that you can use in the MDM profiles. So in here, in leveraging those different variables, I was able to put the extension attribute there. If you see it underneath mail server import, it's $extension attribute _3. So that 3 is actually, it's in the URL, and you can also see this variable after you click save on the extension attribute for the mobile device. After you click save, it'll show you and it'll be kind of grayed out, and it'll have a $extension attribute _3. Or you can also see in the URL, there'll be your Casper server, port, yada, 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 and then ID equals, and that number right after that is the number for your extension attribute. And in this case, what it's saying is, I specifically want you to bring the information from that extension attribute, and we're going to put it into this field. So in this case, I went into Active Directory with the LDAP extension attribute, said, look up the mail host for this user, then bring that into inventory, and then we're going to deploy out a configuration profile to their mobile device that now has their username, their email, all of this information pre-populated but generic. Because once you save this, you could deploy it to a fleet of people, and they would each get their own specific information without having to either manually configure the devices or manually configure individual MDM profiles per system. So there's definitely a lot of value in there in the automation and taking redundant work out of the scenario. So you don't have to jot these down. These slides will be posted, but I went through and I grabbed a quick stack of good places for you to go grab extension attributes to start playing with them. I have some posted on GitHub. Jamf software or Jamf support themselves have some posted, and then various other people, including the Jamf Nation URL, to go to extension attributes. And this is the MacBrained Twitter sites. Check it out. We do live streaming when we have our events. Awesome community. I couldn't be more proud of how people have come together. And like I said, there's lots of other communities out there. But just the whole concept of us sharing our knowledge and sharing our work so that no one has to do double work. Because if I already spent 5 hours on figuring out a problem, you shouldn't have to spend 5 hours if all I have to do is tell you or post a little bit of script or a little bit of code. And I've tortured you enough. Do we have any questions?
Apparently you nailed it. The only question that came in was about the timing of when that information shows up, but so far nothing else has hit.
Timing of the timing of the information of the slides?
No, sorry. So once I create an extension attribute, when do I see that information come back into the JSS?
Yeah, not a problem. I touched on it a little bit, but once you've created the extension attribute, the system has to run inventory in order for that information to be populated. If it's being populated via script, if you're manually entering the information, which you can do from the computer object, you can do it from the mobile device object if you chose to. You could do it from the user. We also showed the ability to do it through the Recon app, but that also is running inventory. So the key there is when the system runs inventory, that's when that information is going to be updated and present, unless you predefine the information to go in there.
Like I said, you nailed it. That was the only one.
Do I run the mic to him? Or?
Yeah, go for it.
So extension attributes are essentially kind of a read-only query that you can use to populate data that you can then leverage inside of the JSS.
Yes, they are still scripts. They are scripts that are running with root access. So as much as I say have fun, you do want to be sure that what you're doing isn't deleting the entire world. So there is something there. But yes, your concept of it being read-only is exactly what it should be, is read-only. We do some stuff where we also then, because we have a menu bar icon called MacDNA that shows some of the status to the user, like last time their CrashLine backup was, whether or not they have software updates, stuff like that. And our extension attributes also write down to a plist locally on the system so that we can access that information without hitting the JSS on a regular basis. Yeah. And also another thing to keep in mind with extension attributes, and I just actually, when I was talking about this presentation with Charles, he and I were talking, Charles Edge, and we both we realized that extension attributes also run in serial. They run alphabetically from one to the last one. Should one of those hang, your systems may not come back with recon. It may not time out. If you somehow made a query that will just never end, you tell it to download Star Wars off the internet in ASCII, and the server dies or something midstream and you don't connection timeout, you will not come back with inventory. So make sure that whatever you have in an extension attribute is definitive and does have an end and will quit. Thus, really start with the templates, see how other people have done it, and start modifying those to your own tools first.
Kind of to that point, are there too many extension attributes? Like if I go out and define like 1,000 of these, is this going to take a big hit on things? Like what's kind of a sweet spot for that?
No, that's a good question too. So, and that is, so you are adding information to your database. Absolutely, but I mean that's what's going to happen, and it's not a huge amount. It's just text. It's just text data. So in our scenario, we have I think 92 extension attributes, and we don't have a problem. Like everything recon's just fine. Within a minute or so, a computer will be done with its inventory. But that's your telltale sign. You know, test, 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 test. And make sure that on a separate JSS, a dev instance, which if you don't know is completely within your licensing model, you can spin up a test JSS and test your stuff on a test system and see, okay, I have this new extension attribute. My system never came back from recon. All right, well, I guess there's something wrong with that one. But then you can also say, hey, I have 1,000 extension attributes. If they're all defaults reads, I don't even think that would be a problem. It's a huge random number, but with just a default read, that's not really doing anything. That's just a quick bloop. If you're asking for more information, if you're querying Spotlight or something that's CPU intensive, you want to keep an eye on that. So his question was if there was any logging information when running extension attributes. So you can run recon as verbose mode, and that can give you somewhat of a concept of where it is. But you can define in your extension attribute to write out to a log if you wanted to. But since these extension attributes are just scripts anyways, you can run them locally on your system to test them as root before putting them in the JSS and running them as inventory. Yeah, as far as logging goes, not really. If you want to get down in the nitty gritty, if something's hanging and you're not quite sure what, you can pull up a ps-ax, list all the processes, see what the Jamf binary is doing, and in there you'll see down in, it's like library application to support Jamf, and I think it's like temp or something like that. They download the scripts and run them one at a time, and you can see which script it's running. But if they'd have to actually be stuck, because they delete themselves as soon as they do one run, they're gone, which means everything's working fine theoretically. So, yeah. All right, cool. Thank you very much.